How's it going, everybody? It's your boy Sandy here. With Halloween right around the corner, I thought I might as well just kind of talk about some, interesting, I wouldn't exactly say that this entire video is just more about the experiences, but more or less just about costumes that I had in the past. Now, a little bit of a fun fact about me, I kept on trick-or-treating up until I think like the year before last year, if I remember correctly. I'm not entirely sure. All I remember is that it wasn't that long ago since, I last actually participated in trick-or-treating. Outside of that, I still at least have some pretty decent memories of some pretty, pretty cool and kind of, more or less just funny costumes and just stories surrounding them. So, there are 4 costumes that I remember, like, very, very well. And those 4 were, those 4 were, like, a Freddy Krueger costume, a Jason Voorhees costume, a Lunatic Cultist one, and one that was more or less a joke, and I'll save that one for last. So, first off, the Jason Voorhees and the Freddy Krueger costumes, those are probably the 2 best costumes that I've actually ever had when it comes to Halloween costumes. The Freddy Krueger one, I had like the sweater and everything. It was all like tattered and whatnot to kind of, sell the appearance. I had like this little mask and whatnot. Here's the thing about the mask that I had for the Freddy Krueger costume. It was a big, like, kind of like Freddy Krueger mask that went around your entire head, but it kind of, had some openings for the wearer's eyes and their mouth. But here's the thing, back when I wore this costume, I was I was smaller. I was a smaller person back then. So the mask itself kind of like drooped over my head, and it just like barely even fit around me. So in order to actually make it fit, I think if I remember correctly, we like put baby pins around like the neck area of the mask, so that way it would stay up, and so that way it wouldn't like fall over. And another idea that we had for the thing was to, like, I don't know, put makeup around the areas that were exposed on the mask. But we just never really did that because, 1, there wasn't really enough time, and 2, well, I mean, the mask was already good enough, to be honest. But yeah, pretty much I had everything for the costume. I had everything for the costume. I even had, like, a toy-bladed glove that I wore. It was a pretty good costume, in my opinion. Then there was a Jason Voorhees one. The only interesting thing that I can remember about it, it was another good costume. I had pretty much everything about it, but one of the weird things I remember about it was that for the mask, for some reason, Mama had, like, this idea to, like, I don't know, like, hot glue, like, some, like, black wire mesh around, like, within one of the eyes. I don't know what the purpose of it was. I could still see out of it, but I just didn't understand. I still, to this day, don't really understand why. Like, it was just kind of weird, but it, in a way it made it look better in my opinion, but it was just kind of like a weird kind of like thing to add on. Then I guess the third costume, and these last 2 costumes are ones that I actually have a little bit better memories of just like things that surround them. First off was the Lunatic Cultist one, and I wore this one pretty much around the time that Terraria 1.3 was out, so you can kind of imagine around there. So, the Lunatic Cultist costume, basically, it was a little bit more of like a simpler costume. It literally only had 2 pieces to it, and that was the mask and the robe. And the mask, you've probably seen it in my most recent video if you haven't seen that one, but that's basically the mask that I used for the Lunatic Cultist costume. The robe, however, was just like a simple purple-blue robe that I kind of wore. It was a little bit of a cheaper looking costume, but it was still enough to at least kind of, give off the general idea to anyone who kind of knew what I was trying to go for as, hey, that's a Lunatic Cultist from Terraria, or at least that's how I saw it. But one kind of funny thing about it is that, again, back when I wore this costume, I was a smaller person, I was much shorter, and the robe itself was, was a little bit longer than, I actually was. So as I was, going around and trick-or-treating, I kept on, like, it kept on catching underneath my foot, and I would end up scraping it against the pavement, and by the time that the trick-or-treating ended up ending, the entire bottom area of the robe just basically looks like one of our cats just had way too much fun with it. It looked all messed up, and pretty much after that it was just never used again. I think we pretty much just threw it in the trash because it was that badly messed up. But you know, it was a pretty interesting it was a pretty interesting costume. It was a simpler costume, and I still have the mask to this day, you know, as I've already mentioned. But fun fact about that mask, one time, I think like last year, I was about to sit down in this chair, and I forgot that I put the mask inside of like the chair, and I accidentally sat on it, and it broke in half. So I just basically hot glued it. I basically just kind of like glued the two halves back together, and I can barely even tell that I even glued it back together. I mean, again, you can watch one of my more recent videos where I actually had a face cam. You can barely even tell that that thing was basically broken in half, you know, by me accidentally sitting on it. Like, that's, you know, no, it's pretty impressive in my opinion, at least for me. And then finally, there was a costume that I think was the last costume that I ever wore, the last time I ever went trick-or-treating. And this one was kind of more or less just like a joke costume. So I had a Master Chief helmet. So I got this Master Chief helmet. And one kind of like annoying thing about that helmet was that the visor was extremely darkened. So while I was going around and trick-or-treating, I basically, for the most part, had to have, like, the helmet, like, I had to hold it under my arm so that way I could see where I was going, because the visor was just that dark that I couldn't see anything, and the only time in which I put the helmet on was just, you know, when, you know, my friends and I were, you know, going up to someone's house to, you know, get some, get the candy and whatnot, you know, you get the idea. Basically, you know, it was an entirely blacked out visor. Well, it wasn't entirely blacked out, you could still kind of see, but I could barely even see anything, and considering that it was during the nighttime, you could basically safely guess that if I were to wear that helmet throughout the entire time I was out there, I'd probably be stumbling around like an idiot, especially since back then the sidewalks were way too screwed up. Matter of fact, I might actually have another story video regarding that, because Jesus Christ, back then the sidewalks were like, you know, your worst enemy if you were going outside. But so I had this Master Chief helmet, and I had like this like camo jacket and these camo pants, and I decided to make a joke costume by including an apron with it and call it Master Chef. So that was basically the last costume that I ever wore, was literally a joke costume. Master Chef was what it was called, and honestly, out of all the costumes that I can remember that I had for Halloween, that one was by far my favorite one, mostly due to the fact that it was just a joke costume that, honestly, I don't know. It was just a funny costume. I liked it. And it was my favorite one out of all the ones. And it was probably my favorite Halloween that year as well. I think that was probably the biggest haul that I ever made, you know, was during that Halloween. And that was the last Halloween that I ever went trick-or-treating. Ever since then, I've just been mainly hanging out at the house. And this Halloween weekend, I'm just gonna, you know, be watching horror movies and whatnot. So, you know, definitely not trick-or-treating this year. And even if I didn't already have plans to watch horror movies, you know, this weekend, I probably still wouldn't go out trick-or-treating, considering, you know, the disease and whatnot that's going around. And on top of that, too, I don't really have a costume. I mean, you know, I don't, that's just basically it. So, yeah. Anyways, guys, that's it for today's video. If you guys enjoyed today's video, please consider leaving a like. That's very well appreciated. If you're new to the channel and you want to see more content like this, please consider subscribing. Leave a comment down below what you thought about the video and what you want me to talk about next. Anyways, guys, this has been Sandy. Have yourselves a nice day, and also have a nice Halloween.